it's one of the lowest competencies of HR leaders is actually technology. And the second part, lowest one is data.
So we did a survey this year. We conducted across 400 HR leaders across the country. The most shocking stat that I saw is the percentage that are still doing planning in spreadsheets. It's almost 50% said they lacked clear visibility into the current state of the organization.
The second part of it was they don't feel comfortable at all around succession.
I also think, though, at the same time that we in the HR tech space have let HR down in many ways of making that easier and more intuitive. And it's not about displacement. It's about taking things off your plate and allowing you to go do other things.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Sackett, and we are back with another edition of HR Famous. And I have a guest today, and I'm excited about having this conversation because it's timely as we get to the fourth quarter of 2025. Tom, tell everybody kind of who you are, what you do, where you came from. We'll start at birth and we'll move forward. This is the Joe Rogan podcast. We're going to go 5 hours. No, I'm just kidding.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Tim. So Tom McCarty, I'm the CEO of OrgChart. I've spent most of my entire career in technology. Did a long stint at Dell and then moved into the software space. Following that, doing different, did a bit of at Intuit and different growth stage companies, and have been running OrgChart now for a little over, right at 4 years, and obviously getting to know the HR community extremely well over that period of time. And excited to chat today.
Tom, I think it was Tin Cup that probably estimated there's 10,000 products in the HR tech space. It actually might be more. That was a number he came up with. Again, did some kind of guesstimation math of some sort when he was doing all these reports back in the day. It could be exponentially more than that now. So what I find is most of the space, they know a tiny fraction. It would be an interesting survey. We should do the survey. Name every single HR product you know. I bet the average person in HR couldn't come up with more than 10 or 15. And so what you know and what your marketing team knows, right, is we're constantly trying to get the word out of who we are, what we are. So explain to everybody kind of what OrgChart is, and the best elevator pitch you could give it.
Yeah. So, we are built for HR and used by HR. We talk a lot about the fact that we give you the org chart you need whenever you need it. But we think about that differently because I think a lot of HR thinks about org chart as just like that name, title, reporting structure. And man, it is a painful and manual process today. Despite the 10,000 products that are out there that you mentioned. But then we say hey, you should actually be using this view to have better, richer conversations. So we let you bring in, so obviously we automate your visibility, but then we let you bring deeper insights so that you can have a chart that is reflective of the discussion you're leading. So maybe you're doing pay planning and you've got performance reviews and critical skill and key talent indicators and other things on the chart, allowing you to have a richer discussion. And then we also do the future vision of the organization. So we allow you to use the chart to create more informed decisions and make future changes to your organization and modeling in a more intuitive way. So we really automate those org charts, give you deeper lenses across the organization with them, and then allow you to do your workforce planning for all of your future case scenarios for the business.
And the workforce modeling piece sounds so advanced. It sounds enterprise, which again, it is. I mean, you guys obviously, help enterprise organizations. How small do you think or is it the sophistication of the organization regardless of size when you start to talk about things like that?
So we talk about our product across those 3 lenses of visibility, insights, and vision, but then we kind of layer in what we talk about as like an HR maturity model. And when I say that, I don't mean that to say you do the work that's right for you and your organization at the time that you're in and what you need, right? And so but we generally see, obviously, as you get into very larger companies, if you get into 1,000 and more employees, you're probably doing workforce planning. You're further on that curve of what all you need from us. But we also have customers with 100 or 150 employees who are no, we do planning every year and we really want to get off spreadsheets. And so it's not dependent on size, although obviously size starts to dictate it. But we definitely see smaller organizations who are getting ahead of the curve and thinking about, hey, where do I need to be a few years from now, and how do I start getting in that direction? And we're growing 10 or 15 or 20 or more percent per year, and man, how do you absorb 20 more headcount into our 100 people? Like, it's a 20% increase in your team. Like, that's a big change. You really need to be thoughtful about that. And so we do have customers of all sizes using us for everything from just org chart automation all the way to long-term planning.
Yeah, it is interesting because sometimes I run into like, a company that's like 100, but they have this like massive growth that's about to happen. Could be for a lot of reasons, right? Government contract or just in a product that's exploding. In those companies, even though like the size of their team and the level and all that smaller, like they might need that tool more than a company that's matured and kind of just knows like, hey, we're running down the track the same way pretty much year after year at this point.
Yeah,
Well, cool. Thank you for that. And people are like, Look, we're not doing a demo. That's not what this is. I'm a nerd for the tech, so I love to talk to founders and CEOs and people that are doing this in the space, and also like to
yeah,
introduce it to the audience because I think it's important. I think the more we can get educated around what's out there, the products that are out there, we can become better within our role. It's one of the lowest competencies of HR leaders is actually technology, and the second part lowest one is data. And so
yeah,
you're like, well, wait a minute, that's kind of what we help with.
yeah. The
you know
epicenter of it, right? So,
right. And
yeah,
so so that's why I'm so intrigued by kind of what you guys do because I mean outwardly people would be like, so it's an org chart. You're like, no, but it's so much more than that. Like the
yeah,
org chart part of it's the easy part. The harder
right.
part is like as you start to build through, it becomes really difficult. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and look, I mean, I think you're right too. I mean, when you look at it, like the competencies around technology and data, is a challenge or not the strength for your average HR leader. I also think though at the same time that we in the HR tech space have let HR down in many ways of making that easier and more intuitive for
yes,
them. Like
yeah,
like I didn't, I have friends that are in HR. I have colleagues that are in HR. They didn't get into HR to be technology experts. They didn't get into HR
yeah,
to be data analysts. They got into HR to like help people achieve their best selves in their roles, to help companies make the best out of their resources of their people. Like their passion is people, not technology and data sets, right? I
yeah.
think they use those as tools, but unfortunately, I think we don't make it easy for them to use those tools sometimes, and that keeps them out of what they're great at, which is the conversations, it is the thought leadership, it is the helping get the right people in the right places and maximizing someone's potential. Like those are where we want to be able to empower HR to spend their time, not on how do I get more proficient at the technology? How do I get better at analyzing data sets?
It's a weird leadership dynamic. You didn't get into tech leadership, I'm sure, to raise money.
Yeah,
You're like, oh no, I'm interested in tech and I want to build tech and I want to be a part of this. But at the end of the day, you're like, oh, as a leader, there's so much financial aspect to it. And I think as an HR person too, is like, I don't need you to know how the tech is built. I need you to be curious. I
yeah,
need you to be kind of like, how could this make our company better? And who else is doing what? And just be curious about it. You don't have to know what the back end is built on and all the other crap.
totally.
Like that's
Yeah,
but I think like as leaders, sometimes we have like these competencies that you go, well, that wasn't what I got into this for. And you're like, yeah, but you're here now. And if you want
yeah,
to be a leader and you want to be a good leader, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
an aspect of it,
This
right?
is
That you
part
have
of
to
it.
kind of know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yep, for
Well,
sure.
we want to talk about orgs of the future, especially in like coming into 2026 and in Q1, because everyone's kind of doing their planning right now. And it's a topic, obviously, you guys are kind of front and center. And as we talk about this shift into like so much of like AI technology coming in and changing what potentially that org might look like.
Hmm.
You and I kind of off, camera beforehand, we're talking. It's my view that like, yeah, obviously the org is going to change, but every single leader has a functional responsibility of what's going to change as well. And we tend to have all of this conversation around the tech. We're not having a ton of conversation around the actual, like, what does the future of our function, our org look
Yeah,
like, and what could it? And when we do, it tends to seem like almost like death scrolling, like, oh my gosh, people are going to lose their jobs, and you kind of get the media side of that because if it bleeds, it leads. We kind of see more of the reality of that's not really what's going to happen. There's going to be this evolution of the human worker in a lot of ways.
yeah.
And so, like, give me your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think our customers are certainly deep in planning right now, and we hear from this of like, hey, how do you start thinking about your organization in light of AI, and where do you need to be putting your investments? Where are your people going to be in the future? I also talk to like, look, I'm in the tech space. I talk to a lot of people who are young in their career, and even my own kids of like, well, is there a career in development in the future? And I'm like, yeah, like it's not going away. I was like, I think it's going to change the capacity of what people do. If you have, you know, 500 customer support agents today, you might not need 500 tomorrow. But eventually there's this growth that starts to catch back up to it, where the capacity on a per person basis increases, but then businesses thrive and grow, and eventually you still are going to have to hire more devs. You're still going to have to hire more customer support people. I also think like this is the stage at which we start to get to innovate, which is the stage at which we could start to think about, well, if we don't have to do that, what could we go do?
Yeah,
What are the other things that we can start to do? Our CMO and I have had conversations on this, because there's a lot around marketing that's getting hit by like, hey, okay, well, so much can be generated from AI tools on the marketing space that we do manually today. Like one of the things is like, man, the amount of emails people are now getting is going through the roof. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing,
insane. I
right?
bet I auto delete. When I say auto delete, I just literally like you go through your phone and just like check and just pop. And I bet on an average day it has to be 250 to 500.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Insane,
But
insane.
like one of my questions though is like, is this an opportunity for us to start to think about how do we get more authentic? Is this an opportunity for us to think about how do we start to do other things that other people aren't doing to stand out from that? Like, and
Yeah,
so it actually allows us to start thinking about things differently and say, well, what can I go do? And I think as you're starting to get into planning and you're starting to get forward, like if you're not thinking about what your organization needs to look like 4 or 5 years from now, because let's all be honest, every one of us, every company, whether you're in technology or manufactured goods or services or anything else, it's AI is going to have an impact on how we do our jobs and how we run our businesses, how we engage with our teams and our customers. It will have an impact. So
yeah.
you need to start thinking about like, hey, what's this potentially look like, and then what steps do I start taking next year? Capgemini actually just did an article recently talking about this. Like, imagine your organization 5 years from now. What does it need to look like? Where do you see it being? And then what are the steps you start taking next year to start walking towards that, right? And so how are you educating your team on AI? It's not going away. Everybody needs to be thinking about it. Everybody needs to be picking up this new skill so that they can incorporate it. And it's not about displacement. It's about taking things off your plate and allowing you to go do other things. That is how I encourage people to think about it.
It's interesting. When I first got my career, it was a common thing that you always had this kind of rolling 5, 10 year kind of strategy plan that organizations would really put a lot of time into and talk about, really across the every function. And it seems like over the last decade or so, it's kind of gone away because everyone's like, well, it moves so fast now. Like it's worthless to have a 5 year plan, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, "Ah, God, the world could be, completely changed." And there's a part of me that goes, it can, but if you don't, you can also, if you don't create that plan, you have nothing to go like vision to go towards, right? Like you
Yeah.
still have to go out and do the work because it, while everything does change pretty quickly, it also changes pretty slowly in the macro sense of things, right? Like
Yeah.
we know, like we talk about like, oh, AI and adoption and recruiting or whatever. And I'm like, 4 years from now, I'm still going to run into companies that are basically still collecting applications from by paper. And like, you're
Sure.
just going to be like, how the heck did you fall down a rabbit hole and no one
Yeah, yeah.
found you? Right.
Yeah. 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 No,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, like, look, obviously things are changing faster now than they did 30 years ago or 20 years ago
Yeah.
or 10 years ago now. Like, because we've reached this like acceleration curve that we're going to go through with AI, and it'll keep getting changing and evolving. So like, can you plan for 5 years from now? Is like whatever you do now going to really happen 5 years from now? Well, no, it may not be like, but what if you were 80% right 5 years
Yeah.
ago and you
Exactly.
started
Yeah.
down the path and then you started building the right signals and you're adjusting every year? I guarantee you're going to land in a better place than someone who's saying, it's not worth it, so I'm just going to keep going without looking down the road, right? Because it's
Yeah.
changing to I'm going to be reactive and not be proactive, is what you're basically saying if you're not going to go do advanced planning and look 3 to 5 years down the road. And so, no, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us are going to be able to say this is definitely what's going to happen 5 years from now. But you should start to form point of views. You should start marching towards it and adjust and pivot along the way.
So in your opinion, like as you take a look at 2026, 2027, like how orgs are looking at their, their structure of their organizations, what do you like what are the things you're seeing them start to think about, talk about, maybe even do when it comes to that kind of structural component?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is certainly just like where do AI agents sit and how do you kind of think about those in terms of the org of like how are we empowering those? How are we deploying them into the organization? We're even starting to kind of have conversations about whether or not we should show them on the org chart of like, hey, we have this many headcount plus this many AI agents running, and like how are we servicing the organization? And so I think people are starting to think in those directions. And then, what are the roles and depending on your size of your organizations, how do I start to build that expertise into my organization? So how do I start to train my team, but also how do I start to hire that expertise into the organization and really doing an evaluation on do we have these skill sets today that could help expand them across our organization, and or do we need to hire them externally or supplement with them externally. And so I think you're seeing a lot of that. Um, that being said, like I still think a lot of people are um, just trying to get to the right organizational structures in general. Like we're talking about all of this,
Still,
man,
yeah.
but here's a fascinating stat for you, Tim.
Yeah.
And we just talked about all this HR technology. So we did a survey this year. We conducted across 400 HR leaders across the country, not focusing on our clients, but just outside. The most shocking stat that I saw in today's day and age is the percentage that are still doing planning in spreadsheets. And of the 400 we surveyed, 98% said they're doing it in spreadsheets. And like,
When I
come
do when
on.
I do HR tech presentations, that's the one slide I love to put up is what's the number one HR technology used today?
Yeah.
Microsoft Excel,
Yeah.
and no one guesses it. They're all like Workday, SAP,
Yeah.
Oracle,
Yeah.
blah blah blah, and you're like Excel, and
Excel.
you're like, oh,
Excel.
and like, hey, raise your hand if you're not using Excel, like unless you're using or Google Sheets, right? Like
Right.
you're using one of
You're
them.
using spreadsheets. Yeah. And by the way, if you think it like, trust me, we joke that they didn't get into HR to learn technology and data, but I guarantee you they didn't get into HR to live in Microsoft Excel, right? Like that's not where we want to be. And I think that the challenge I still see is like, despite all of the fact that you have, like everybody kind of says, oh, well, you've got AI, so you could get to all of this data and you've got all this rich data sets and you have all these things. But are you gathering them all in one place? Are you making informed decisions? Or are we still in 2025 getting in conference rooms and getting on spreadsheets and making decisions? And we can have the most robust spreadsheets in the world, but are you making good informed decisions on your organization just on its current state? Because the other thing we got from it was almost 50% said they lacked clear visibility into the current state of the organization. Well, if half of the organizations don't have clear visibility in the current state, how are you planning your future state if you don't know exactly where you are today? And so like that is still alarming to me today, is like we're not where we need to be on making the right decisions without this kind of transformation that we're about to have. And so like even more so now, we really need to do a better job of understanding the current state, understanding the skill sets in our organization, understanding the strengths and opportunities in departments, and like what do I need to do differently? And if you're not getting that good picture and looking at the right things, you're probably not making the right calls for the future.
It's one of the things that we did a CEO survey in my company.
Hey friends, Marty Robbins here, host of Vibe Makers, a podcast now on the Work Defined Network. Look, we all know workplace culture doesn't come from a slide deck. Gross. It comes from people. So on Vibe Makers, I talk to the folks shaping the experience of work from the inside out. You know, the HR and people ops folk, founders, leaders, and misfits building culture through small bets, big beliefs, and a whole lot of trial and error. No fluff. Well, maybe a little fluff, but mainly just candid talk about what happens when you stop duct taping your culture together. Come check us out. Listen to Vibe Makers wherever you get your podcasts.
beginning of last year, and really just digging in around HR, recruiting, like all these things, like what's working, what's not working. The top two things that weren't working from the CEOs, there were CEOs and COOs, right? So it's like the C-suite of on the operations side. Number one was our recruiting sucks across the board. They kind of just everyone kind of feels that way, and
Yeah.
part of it is we do really bad again reporting to the upper levels of how talent's coming into the company, what we're doing. We just
Hmm.
kind of there's this kind of like belief it's like we're out there hunting when the reality 90% are just kind of posting jobs and seeing
Yeah.
who applies, right? The second part of it was they don't feel comfortable at all around succession, and like
Yeah.
and that leads right into your
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of org planning is like they're like, look, they just don't. I mean, like he's like we talk about it, we have meetings about it, but like there is no structure around succession that we feel like we have the right people in place for the next generation of worker that we need, blah blah blah, leader we need, all of that. Now, you might run into a CEO or a CO or somebody that goes at the highest level, they feel like they have a little bit. Like I know my number
Yeah.
two is going to take over, right?
Yeah.
But even then, that's not even. Sometimes they weren't even comfortable around that. They like, but as you go down levels to VP to director to manager, they're like, it's a complete crapshoot whether we have anybody or not. We have no
Yeah.
idea. I'm
Yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah, these are the two things. I mean, like succession planning, so important, and I think it's important in two capacities. Like, if you're really doing good succession planning, then obviously you're looking internally and you're having a better idea of the bench strength that you built in your organization. And by the way, you're doing the right thing of like starting to show better career paths and career discussions with your team, which they care about, right? Like they want that, and so I think it's twofold that you get out of that. One, if you're doing this well, then hopefully those critical roles are coming from within your company. And you're actually saying, hey, we know this is probably coming a year from now. Who are 5 people in our organization that could do that role? And then what are we doing in the next 12 months to get them ready for it? Right.
Yeah.
And to like help build their skill sets and get them ready for it. And like think about the investment you're doing in those people and like how much more likely you're going to be successful with that role if you're taking those steps internally. Right. I think on the recruiting side, though, like I would actually argue, like part of the problem with like getting the right fit people in is like, are you really identifying well what you need when you open that rec? Are you just going to go hire the next developer, or are you looking at the team that developer is getting hired on and looking at the strengths and opportunities of that team and saying more specifically, who do I need to be getting?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like think the team analogy, like if you were to look at any sports team, they're going to look at the strengths and opportunities and say, well, we're missing these couple of components. How do we go fill that component, not
Yeah.
just the next player on the team,
I love
right?
the
And
team,
so like,
that team analogy
yeah,
like that, and because I think so many get caught up in the family analogy, because like they went for they're looking for the engagement side,
yeah, yeah,
and I'm like, really, organizations are more team than family. I'm not going to kick my uncle to the curb because he
right,
stopped producing, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
if I have a wide receiver that stopped producing, bye, I'm going to go find a younger
right,
one
yeah,
or
yeah,
more
yeah.
experienced
You
one that
don't
better
you don't
perform
interview
for
to
me.
be part of your family,
Right? Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You don't fire your family, but yeah, teams are like, hey, we want to work together, we want to be cohesive, we want to build a great culture, and we all have responsibilities and things that we have to deliver. And yeah, I think I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I also think that especially once you start to get to a certain size, you stop thinking about that team aspect and you just say, well, I need another developer, I need
Yeah.
someone with these
You're
these
100%
things,
correct.
or I need
Yeah.
another customer support person, or I need another demand gen manager in marketing. And you need to be looking at the team you're hiring it on and saying, well, what's missing in this team? What are the skill sets that are there and not there? And how do I get a little bit more specific than just like we get too general on these, and then we're not being specific. The less specific we are on what we need, the more
Yeah.
likely you're going to be to hire someone that's not a great fit. Uh, there's culture fit, and then there's skill and background fit, and culture fit should be a bit more ubiquitous across the company, but the skill fit should be much more. We need to get more specific about it than we are today, and I think it's because we don't, like, when you're opening a requisition, are you actually looking at the org and the team and saying, okay, what do I need to think about when I'm really putting these other 6 people around them and saying, what's the profile that I should be looking for to really complement and round out this team well.
I think if when we
Yeah,
look back, like over the last decade, it's going to be a failure of TA on the skills piece. I'm not a huge skills fan. I mean, in terms of like how a lot of this gets rolled out, because I don't think like if you think about you as an individual, like you're more than 25 skills or 50 skills. You could be a million skills, right?
yeah,
So I have to know like, well, what skills then are important to me as the org for you. It's really difficult as you go on position by position by position. That's a lot of really heavy lifting work. And then over the last decade, we've kind of walked away from the cultural thing because it got so like, and I know why we did it, right? In terms of an inclusive culture and all these things, like you were like, look, it doesn't matter like that piece of it because culture became synonymous with just hiring more of who you already had, which,
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah,
a problem. And so they were like, no, no, no. So don't worry about anything about that. Just worry about the skill. But and I'll give you a great analogy. Like we do a bunch of defense work and we ended up hiring the software engineer and she had everything. She had all the background, all the education, all the experience. 2 weeks in, I get a call from the hiring manager, and he's like, "I have a problem." And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "She refuses to work on a project that's potentially could kill some other people." Like, you applied to come work for a defense company, like
yeah,
and like this is who we
yeah,
are, right? And
yeah,
you're just like, but we got so caught up in like just the skill, and you're like, no, 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 like you have to understand who we are, what we do, and do you want to be a part of that? And if you do, amazing. If
yeah.
you don't, why are you coming here?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it can't be one lens only, right? Like
No,
we
yeah,
need to be a little bit more specific. And there's skills, there's experiences, their background, there's personality, there's culture fit. But I just think we too often are not looking at what's the right fit for the team that you're putting them on.
yeah.
That you're hiring. You're hiring for a specific in a lot of roles. You're hiring for a specific team. You already know who it's going to report to. You've kind of started to map this out. And I think you got to take a step back and look more holistically at it to understand the profile of what you're looking for to ensure a good right fit candidate to come in.
So I love to ask this question to tech leaders. If an HR leader and HR team's listening to this, and you're like, oh my gosh, we need to get started on this, or we need to be better at this, right? Without using your technology, what's the one thing they could do without even using your tech?
Yeah,
If you
I mean, I
could,
think, look, I've got asked this question. I was like, well, what data should we look at? And what I would say is like, look, there's not a one size fits all for everybody, right? Because we all have different things within our business, and like, data exists, the data is out there. I start asking about like, what do you want to know? What are the things like if you kind of had a magic wand and you could say, I'd really like us all to look at these five or six things, and here's why when I'm doing annual pay planning, would you love it if all of your managers considered the same five or six things at minimum, right? But the reality is we don't. We all have
yeah,
different lenses of which we look at it at, and so I kind of start there and say like, forget about how you're like. Don't learn all of the different types of data that are out there. Don't try to learn everything. Start asking better questions of what you're trying to understand, and then say, well, if I to get the answer to that question, what do I need to know? Right.
yeah.
And so like that's where I would start, and then try to get how do you get more consistent about making sure that when you're doing pay planning, when you're doing a riff, when you're doing a 20% growth initiative, that you're being more consistent in what you look at and the questions you're asking across the organization, right? And so like that's what I would say is like the technology, the data, the resources are out there. You need to have a better idea of what you're trying to answer and what you want to look at. Because I think if I put 500 options in front of you of different data and metrics that you could look at, you're going to get overwhelmed
Yeah.
and you're going to be like, whoa, I don't know. You don't need to look at all of them. You don't. And not every organization, some organization needs to look at some of them, and a different organization might need to look at completely different ones. And so like it's important for you to start to identify what that needs to look like for you. And then I promise you the data and the tools are out there to get it. Right. But
It's an
yeah,
interesting evolution of leadership. You think about like becoming a leader. In the past, it was always the best leaders seem to have all the answers, or at least we hired them because we thought that was the case.
yeah,
In this is world of AI, AI has all the answers, so it's the best leaders are going to be the ones that can ask the best questions. And, I mean, that's really this whole prompt thing, right? Is like,
Yeah, I mean,
if
that's
you
the
have the ability to ask the
concept of.
right questions, you have all of this data, you can layer in AI. Like the reality is, are you inquisitive enough? Are you curious enough? Are you, I mean, thinking about it in a different way that you're going to ask different, better questions, I guess.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to name it on like two sides. I think,
Yeah.
I think HR is going to have to be careful on that because you're not going to get all of your HR data into AI models. And there's probably some reasons why you may not want to put all of your people data into AI models.
Yeah. Unless you're building
Um,
unless you're building your private model just for that, like,
yeah,
which is
exactly.
super expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which you're not going to probably, right? And but so you do need a way in which you're going to better bring together all your disparate data sources so that
Right.
you can do that. You do need to teach your team. Like that's something that organizations need to be learning is like how do we prompts and questions to AI is going to be how you get AI to give you better outcomes, right? And that's a skill set we all need to learn. Yet at the same time, if you take AI away, like when is learning how to ask better questions not the right thing to do, right? Like
Yeah.
ask better questions. Like we all need to get more curious. We all need to ask better questions. And I think in some ways we've gotten complacent in that
Yeah.
because there's so many things at our fingertips that we assume somebody else already figured out what questions to ask. And that's why I'm like, don't look at and ask everybody else what data you should be looking at. Like figure out how to like what matters to you and your organization, what are your values, what are the things that are important in how you run your business, and then start to say, well, if those are the things, then what information do I need to understand it better, and make the data and the framework work for you, not you force your business into someone else's data and framework.
Yeah. All right. Before I get you out of here, trying to like, so you think about OrgChart, you think about what you guys do for the clients you work with. Foundationally, who are your best clients? Not brand wise. I'm thinking about what they have. So like, if you're like, hey, we work really well with companies that have big HCM and kind of have some data, whatever that might be. I don't care. Like, what are the ones that you're like, oh, these are the clients that we would put up in front of everybody because foundationally they came to us this way. Because I think what happens is people listen, they're going to hear about this, they're going to be interested. And I'm wondering what are those that are going to be immediately we can help you because.
Yeah, I mean, look, we focus right now for with any organization greater than 100,
Yeah,
and because at that stage you need better visibility into your organization. You're probably doing a lot of this stuff manually. You're probably going into planning and pay planning and other decisions with incomplete data sets, right? And you probably already have an HR system, so the data exists, right? And so, what I could tell you is we can help you on the journey of starting with fixing this. And our best customers, I think, go quickly beyond like, look, the first thing people come to us for is like, I am still manually creating org charts in PowerPoint and
sure. Yeah,
Visio, and I have to
yeah.
update them every time anything happens in my
And
org.
it's an easy button for you guys to give him, right? So
It's an
it's like,
easy
hey, yes,
button. Yeah, right. We're like, cool, we'll fix that for you
yep,
tomorrow. Like
yeah,
done. Like now let's talk about why aren't you when you're doing, people planning conversations, why aren't you doing that by pulling up the manager and their team and seeing the right data on the org chart? You're like, well, because I'm manually doing this. I didn't even think about that.
yeah.
And so like our best customers who are getting the most power out of it will have, man, they'll have 10, 15, 20 different versions of org charts saved for the conversations they're leading, right? And they're
Ooh,
getting in
that's
the
so
they're
cool. Yeah.
yeah, they're
Imagine going into the boardroom with those that,
yeah,
hey,
right.
what if we did this? Well, let me show you, right?
Yeah, and it's like, hey, I'm sitting here with a VP talking about org changes for next year, and we're like, okay, let's talk about your org and let's look at it at these 4 or 5 different lenses before we start making changes, right? And so like that's I think where we see people excel is like they start to say, wow, I can lead more powerful conversations because we're pulling all of this data in and allowing them to surface it at one time and I think that's how my goal is. I said at the beginning. I think as HR tech, we've failed in making it easy,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying we've solved it all, but we're trying to make this part a heck of a lot easier for HR.
So, Tom, how can people find you? They have questions. They're listening to this. Where's the easiest way to find you?
Yeah, well, you can find us at theorgchart.com, and obviously we'll anybody on our team who can help out. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, we're around to help.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it. I'm going to get us out of here. So everybody, that's HR Famous. I'm Tim Sackett with Tom McCartney. Is it McCarty?
McCarty.
From OrgChart. I'm going to get that right eventually.
All good. All good.
Reach out to Tom, ask him the questions. We will see you guys soon.